The gunshot echoed across the Montana landscape as Clara Garfield stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Blood stained the riverbank like spilled wine, seeping into the sandy soil where a man lay half submerged in the rushing waters of the Jefferson River. It was the spring of 1876, and Clara had only been in Montana territory for 3 weeks, enough time to learn that death came swiftly and without ceremony in this untamed wilderness. Clara had been gathering wild berries along the riverbank when she spotted him. A cowboy, judging by his worn leather chaps and dusty trail clothes. His dark hair was matted with blood, his face pale as the moon. Instinct overcame caution as she rushed to the water's edge, her skirts trailing in the cold current. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called, tugging at his shoulders to keep his head above water. His eyes fluttered open deep blue, like the Montana sky at dusk. Recognition flickered across his face, though Clara was certain they'd never met. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the river's flow. "You're the reason I want to live," Clara gasped, wondering if delirium had taken hold of his mind. She'd been a schoolteacher back in Boston before heading west, not the type of woman to inspire such declarations from strange men. "Don't speak," she commanded, tearing at her petticoat to create a makeshift bandage. "You need to save your strength." Blood seeped from a wound in his side just below his ribs. A bullet wound, she realized with growing dread. In Las Animas, Colorado territory, where she'd briefly stayed before continuing north, she'd heard stories about the lawlessness that plagued these territories' outlaws, cattle rustlers, and men who killed for sport. "My name is Clara," she said, pressing the cloth against his wound. "Clara Garfield. I'm going to help you." His lips, cracked and pale, formed a weak smile. "Daniel," he managed before coughing. "Daniel Ashton." "Well, Mr. Ashton, I don't intend to let you die today," Clara declared, though she had no medical training beyond basic first aid. She'd come west to escape the suffocating propriety of Boston society after her fiancé had jilted her at the altar. Now, kneeling beside a bleeding stranger, she wondered if she'd traded one form of danger for another. The wound was deep, but the bullet appeared to have gone clean through. Thank Providence for small mercies, she thought. "Can you stand?" she asked. Already knowing the answer would be no, he shook his head weakly. "My horse, Whistling Ridge, half-mile west," Clara understood. If she could find his horse, she might be able to transport him to safety. But leaving him alone, bleeding by the river, seemed an impossible choice. "I'll be right back," she promised, squeezing his hand. "Don't you dare die while I'm gone, Mr. Ashton." His fingers weakly returned the pressure. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Garfield." Clara tore through the underbrush, her heart pounding with every step. The land around Las Animas was unfamiliar territory, with rolling hills that all looked the same to her eastern eyes. But she'd learned to listen carefully since arriving in the West, and soon she heard the soft nickering of a horse. The magnificent buckskin stallion was tethered to a cottonwood tree, nervously pawing at the ground. A Winchester rifle remained snug in its scabbard, and saddlebags bulged with supplies. "Easy boy," Clara murmured, approaching carefully. The horse snorted but allowed her to untie him. She led him back to where Daniel lay, exactly as she'd left him, though his breathing seemed more labored now. "You found him," Daniel whispered, a faint smile crossing his face. "Diablo's the best horse in 3 territories." Clara wasted no time. "We need to get you on your feet, Mr. Ashton. I can't lift you myself." With agonizing effort and more than a few suppressed cries of pain, she managed to help Daniel onto his horse. He swayed dangerously in the saddle, his face ghostly white from the exertion. "My cabin," he gasped, pointing weakly toward the east. 3 miles. Follow the game trail." Clara nodded, grabbing Diablo's reins and leading him forward. She walked at a careful pace, acutely aware that every jostle could worsen Daniel's condition. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly as they made their slow progress through the wilderness. "Why were you out here alone?" she asked, partly to keep him conscious and partly to satisfy her own curiosity. "Tracking rustlers," he mumbled. "They've been hitting ranches all over. Didn't expect an ambush." "You're a lawman?" Clara asked, surprised. He didn't wear a badge that she could see. A weak laugh escaped him. "No, madam. Just a rancher protecting what's mine." They fell silent as Daniel seemed to drift in and out of consciousness. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool spring air, a bad sign, Clara knew. Infection could set in quickly with wounds like his. After what felt like hours, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a stand of pine trees with a corral off to the side. It was modest but well built, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. "We're here," Clara announced, relief flooding through her. Getting Daniel down from the horse proved even more difficult than getting him up. He collapsed against her, nearly taking them both to the ground, but she managed to half-drag him to the cabin door. It was unlocked. Few people bothered with locks out here, she'd learned. The interior was simple but neat. A bed stood against one wall, a stone fireplace dominated another, and a small table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Rifles hung on pegs by the door, and shelves held supplies and a few dog-eared books. Clara helped Daniel to the bed, then set about finding what she needed. A trunk at the foot of the bed yielded clean linens that she could use for bandages. A bottle of whiskey stood on a shelf, the most effective disinfectant available. "This will hurt," she warned him, uncorking the bottle. Daniel's eyes, glassy with pain, met hers. "Already hurts. Can't get much worse." He was wrong about that. When she poured the whiskey over his wound, his scream echoed through the cabin. Clara winced but continued her work, cleaning the wound as best she could before wrapping it tightly with strips of clean linen. "You're good at this," Daniel muttered once the worst had passed. Clara shook her head. "I'm a schoolteacher, not a nurse. But I've tended to enough scraped knees and playground injuries to know the basics." "A schoolteacher?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "What brings a schoolteacher out to Montana territory?" Clara busied herself with tidying up the bloodied rags. "A fresh start," she said simply, not willing to share the humiliation of being abandoned at the altar by William Preston Roman III, Boston's most eligible bachelor. "I'm headed to Virginia City to take a position at their school." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes growing heavy. "Guess I'm lucky you were taking the scenic route." "Rest now," Clara instructed, pulling a blanket over him. "You've lost a lot of blood." As Daniel drifted into uneasy sleep, Clara took stock of her situation. Night was falling, and she was alone in a cabin with an injured stranger miles from the nearest town. The propriety she'd been raised with screamed that this was scandalous, ruinous even. But the practical side of her, the side that had decided to journey west in the first place, knew she had no choice. She couldn't leave him, not like this. And traveling through unfamiliar wilderness after dark was suicide. She would have to stay, at least for the night. Clara stepped outside to tend to Diablo, removing his saddle and giving him water from the well beside the cabin. The horse nuzzled her hand in gratitude. "You're welcome," she murmured. "Now let's just hope your master survives the night." Back inside, she stoked the fire and found some beans and salt pork in Daniel's provisions. She prepared a simple meal, eating a small portion herself and setting aside the rest for when Daniel awoke. As night deepened, Clara sat in the chair beside Daniel's bed, watching his chest rise and fall. His face, relaxed in sleep, revealed a handsome man, perhaps a few years older than her 24 years. Dark stubble covered a strong jaw, and his hands, even in repose, showed the calluses and small scars of hard work. "You're the reason I want to live," he had said. Such strange words from a dying man to a woman he'd never met. Perhaps he'd mistaken her for someone else, or perhaps it was just the ramblings of a man facing death. Either way, Clara was determined to ensure his words didn't become merely the last gasp of a dying cowboy. She would save him, and then she would continue on her journey to Virginia City, where a new life awaited her, a life far from Boston's painful memories. Outside, an owl hooted softly, and the Montana wilderness settled into nighttime rhythms. Clara's eyes grew heavy as she maintained her vigil, eventually succumbing to exhaustion in the uncomfortable wooden chair. She awoke with a start to find early morning light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Daniel was awake, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "You stayed," he said simply. Clara straightened, embarrassed to have fallen asleep at her post. "Of course I stayed. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," he replied with a weak attempt at humor. "But better than yesterday, thanks to you." Clara placed a hand on his forehead. "Your fever's not too high. That's a good sign." She helped him drink some water and eat a little of the beans she'd prepared the night before. His color was better, though he was still dangerously weak. "The men who shot you," Clara said as she changed his bandages. "Will they come looking to finish the job?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Possibly. They're part of the Blackwater Gang. Been terrorizing ranchers from Wyoming to Montana. I caught them running off with 2 of my best breeding bulls." "Shouldn't the law handle this?" Clara asked, concerned. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Laws spread thin out here, Miss Garfield. Marshal's office in Virginia City has 3 men covering territory it would take an army to patrol." Clara frowned, disturbed by the casual acceptance of such lawlessness. In Boston, the police were never more than a whistle away. Here, it seemed, a man truly had to defend himself or perish. "Well, you're in no condition to fight anyone," she declared. "You need rest and time to heal. And you need to get to Virginia City," Daniel countered. "I appreciate what you've done, Miss Garfield, but I can manage from here." Clara crossed her arms. "Can you now? Can you reach the water bucket on your own? Change your bandages? Cook?" Daniel tried to sit up as if to prove he could, but fell back with a grimace. "Maybe not today," he admitted reluctantly. "Not tomorrow either, I'd wager," Clara said. "I can't in good conscience leave you here alone, Mr. Ashton." "Daniel," he corrected. "If you're going to be my nurse, you might as well use my given name." "Clara, then," she replied with a small smile. "And I'm not a nurse, just a woman who couldn't leave a bleeding man to die by the river." Daniel's expression softened. "About what I said yesterday, by the river, I don't rightly remember much, but—" Clara waved a hand dismissively. "You were delirious. I didn't take it to heart." Something flickered across Daniel's face, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded. "Of course. Still, I'm grateful beyond words." Over the next 3 days, Clara settled into an unexpected routine. She tended to Daniel's wound, prepared simple meals from his supplies, and fetched water from the well. In the afternoons, when Daniel slept, she explored the area immediately surrounding the cabin, always careful not to venture too far. She discovered that Daniel's ranch was modest but well planned. A small herd of cattle grazed in a valley about a half-mile from the cabin. The barn housed 2 more horses besides Diablo, and chickens pecked contentedly in a fenced run. On the 4th morning, she entered the cabin with fresh eggs to find Daniel sitting up in bed, looking considerably improved. "You've been taking care of my animals," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. "They needed tending. I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "You save my life, nurse me back to health, and take care of my livestock. Mind is the last thing I'd be doing." Clara felt her cheeks warm at his praise. It seemed the Christian thing to do. Most Christians I know would have kept right on riding, Daniel said wryly. Especially a proper Eastern lady like yourself. She busied herself with preparing breakfast to hide her reaction to his words. Clara hadn't felt like a proper lady in a long time, not since she'd boarded the train westward, leaving behind the pitying glances and whispered gossip that had followed her failed wedding. "I'm not as proper as I appear, Mr. Ashton Daniel," she corrected herself. A proper lady wouldn't be alone in a man's cabin for days on end. Daniel watched her move about the small space. "What made you come west?" "Really?" Clara cracked eggs into a pan before answering. "Scandal," she said simply. "Or rather, fleeing one." Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "The West is good for that. Nobody asks too many questions about your past out here." "And you?" Clara asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "What brought you to Montana?" "The war," Daniel replied, his expression clouding. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Tennessee. Too many ghosts. Came west, worked cattle drives, saved enough to buy this place 3 years ago." Clara nodded, understanding. Many men had headed west after the Civil War ended 11 years ago, seeking to escape memories or make fresh starts. "You were a soldier?" she asked gently. "Confederate cavalry," he confirmed. "Not something I advertise much up here." Clara served the eggs, settling into the chair beside his bed. "The war's been over a long time." "Some wounds don't heal clean," Daniel said quietly. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara wondered about the demons that chased Daniel Ashton. What memories kept him isolated on this remote Montana ranch, defending his cattle single-handedly against ruthless gangs? By the 6th day, Daniel was able to move around the cabin with the help of a makeshift crutch Clara had fashioned from a sturdy branch. His strength was returning, though the wound was still tender. "You should be in Virginia City by now," he said as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "The school term must be starting soon." Clara nodded. "Next Monday. I still have time to make it." "I'll ride with you," Daniel offered. "These hills aren't safe for a woman alone, especially with the Blackwater Gang operating in the area." Clara turned to look at him. "You're in no condition to ride that far." "I'm better than I was," he insisted. "And I owe you that much at least." Clara studied his face in the fading light. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his eyes were clear and determined. Still, she worried about the strain such a journey would put on his healing body. "Let's see how you're feeling in the morning," she suggested diplomatically. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she'd been sleeping on a pallet of blankets near the fireplace. A sound outside caught her attention. She froze, listening intently. Daniel, who had been reading by lamplight, set his book aside. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded, reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall beside his bed. "Get the lamp," he instructed quietly. Clara extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the dying embers in the fireplace. Through the window, she could see 3 shadowy figures approaching on horseback. "Blackwater Gang." She breathed, fear clutching at her heart. "Likely," Daniel confirmed, his voice tight. "They probably came back to check if I died where they left me." Finding my horse gone would have led them here. Clara's mind raced. Daniel was in no condition to defend against 3 armed men, and she had never fired a gun in her life. "What do we do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel shifted painfully to a sitting position, rifle across his lap. "There's a trapdoor under the rug. Root cellar. I want you to hide there." Clara shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "This isn't a debate, Clara," Daniel said sharply. "I can't protect you and fight them at the same time." I don't need protecting, she retorted. I need a weapon. Surprise flickered across Daniel's face, followed by reluctant admiration. He gestured to a chest in the corner. Second shotgun's in there. It's loaded. But Clara, I may not know how to shoot, she interrupted, retrieving the shotgun, but I can certainly point it at someone threatening us. A heavy knock sounded at the door. Ashton, a gruff voice called. We know you're in there. Come on out and maybe we won't burn your place down around you. Daniel met Clara's eyes in the dim light. Stay to the side, out of the line of fire from the windows, he whispered. Then, louder. What do you want, Reed? The man outside laughed. Just checking if you're dead yet. I put a bullet in you clean as can be. Sorry to disappoint you, Daniel called back. I'm very much alive. Not for long, another voice growled. You cost us 2 good men with that rifle of yours before we got you. Clara's heart pounded so loudly she was sure the men outside must hear it. Daniel had killed 2 of their gang in self-defense. No wonder they wanted revenge. I've got no quarrel with you boys if you leave my cattle alone, Daniel said, his voice remarkably steady. But if you're here for trouble, you should know the marshal's office has been notified about your activities. This was a bluff, Clara knew. There had been no opportunity to contact any law enforcement. A moment of silence followed before Reed spoke again. That's mighty interesting, considering nobody's passed through headed to Virginia City in the past week. Clara and Daniel exchanged a glance. The gang had been watching the trails. Marshall sent a telegram from Bozeman. Daniel improvised smoothly. They're forming a posse as we speak. Another silence. Clara could almost feel the men outside weighing their options. We're not finished, Ashton, Reed finally called. You're a dead man walking. The sound of horses moving away from the cabin brought a wave of relief so intense Clara nearly dropped the shotgun. Daniel slumped back against the wall, his face pale with tension and pain. They'll be back, he said grimly. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Clara set the shotgun aside and hurried to check his wound. The exertion had caused it to seep blood again. You've reopened it, she chided, reaching for fresh bandages. Better than getting shot again, Daniel replied, attempting humor despite his obvious discomfort. As Clara redressed his wound, her hands trembled with delayed fear. We need to get you to Virginia City, she said decisively. You need a proper doctor and you'll be safer there. Daniel caught her wrist gently. And leave my ranch undefended, everything I've worked for. Your life is worth more than cattle and land, Clara insisted. Daniel's eyes held hers. Is it? Most men out here would disagree. Clara pulled her hand away, disturbed by his casual disregard for his own life. Well, I'm not most men, and I say your life matters. A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. Because I'm the reason you want to live, he asked, echoing his delirious words from days earlier. Clara felt her cheeks flush. Because every life has value, Mr. Ashton, even a stubborn cowboy's. Daniel's smile widened slightly. You're quite something, Clara Garfield. So I've been told, she replied dryly. Usually not as a compliment. They both knew sleep would be impossible for the remainder of the night. Clara kept watch by the window while Daniel dozed fitfully, his rifle never far from reach. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in delicate pinks and oranges, Clara made her decision. I'm going to Virginia City today, she announced when Daniel awoke. To fetch the doctor and alert the marshal about the Blackwater Gang. Daniel struggled to sit up. Not alone, you're not. You can barely stand for more than a few minutes, Clara pointed out reasonably. And someone needs to stay here to protect the ranch. It's too dangerous, Daniel argued. Reed and his men could be watching the trails. Clara began gathering her few belongings. Which is why I'll take the southern route you showed me on your map. It's longer but less traveled. Daniel watched her preparations with growing frustration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Thank you," Clara replied primly. "I consider that a valuable trait in these circumstances." Despite his protests, Daniel knew she was right. His wound, though healing, left him too weak for the journey, and they needed help if they were to survive another encounter with the Blackwater Gang. "Take Diablo," he finally conceded. "He's the fastest horse I've got and sure-footed on mountain trails." Clara nodded, relieved he wasn't going to fight her on this. "I'll leave at first light tomorrow. That should get me to Virginia City by nightfall if I push hard." "You'll need this," Daniel said, reaching for his gun belt. "Do you know how to use a revolver?" Clara shook her head. "I told you, I've never fired a gun in my life." Daniel gestured her closer. "Then it's time you learned." He spent the rest of the day teaching Clara the basics of handling his Colt revolver, how to load it, how to aim, how to account for the kick when she fired. They practiced with empty chambers, Daniel correcting her grip and stance with gentle touches that sent unexpected warmth through Clara's body. "You're a quick study," he said as evening approached. "But remember, aim for the center of what you can see. Don't try for fancy shots." Clara nodded solemnly, the weight of the gun unfamiliar but necessary. "I hope I won't need to use it." "So do I," Daniel agreed, "but hope isn't a strategy out here." That night they ate a simple dinner in surprisingly comfortable silence. Clara found herself studying Daniel's face, memorizing the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. "What happens after?" Daniel asked suddenly. Clara looked up from her plate. "After what?" "After you fetch the doctor and the marshal. After this is all over." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "You'll go on to Virginia City to take up your teaching position." Clara hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. She'd been so focused on keeping Daniel alive, on surviving each day, that her original plans seemed distant and vague. "I suppose I will," she said slowly. "That's why I came west, after all." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "You'll make a fine teacher. Those children will be lucky to have you." Something in his tone made Clara's heart ache strangely. "What about you? What will you do once the Blackwater Gang is dealt with?" "Same as I've always done," he replied with a shrug. "Tend my cattle, expand the herd if I can. Maybe add on to the cabin come winter." "Alone?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Daniel's gaze intensified. "That depends." Clara looked away first, suddenly finding the remaining beans on her plate fascinating. "I should get some rest if I'm to leave at first light." She felt Daniel watching her as she cleared their plates and prepared for bed. The small cabin seemed even smaller tonight, charged with unspoken words and feelings Clara wasn't ready to examine. Morning came too quickly. Clara dressed in her sturdiest clothes for the ride, securing her hair tightly beneath her bonnet. Daniel had packed Diablo's saddlebags with provisions for the journey, along with a detailed map, marked with the safest route to Virginia City. "If you're not back by tomorrow night, I'm coming after you, wound or no wound," Daniel said as he helped her mount Diablo, his hands strong and warm at her waist. Clara looked down at him, noting how pale he still was despite his determined expression. "Don't you dare, Daniel Ashton. I've worked too hard keeping you alive to have you undo it all with foolish heroics." A smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." Clara adjusted her skirts, the revolver heavy in the pocket she'd sewn into her petticoat. "Bar the door when I'm gone. Don't open it for anyone but me." Daniel nodded, his hand lingering on Diablo's neck. "Clara." He began, then seemed to think better of it. "Ride safe." Clara understood all the things he wasn't saying. "Be careful, come back. I'll be waiting." She nodded once, then urged Diablo forward, not allowing herself to look back at the small cabin that had somehow begun to feel like home. The trail to Virginia City wound through rugged country, following streams and cutting through stands of pine and aspen. Clara rode carefully but steadily, keeping her eyes and ears alert for any sign of trouble. The beauty of the Montana wilderness surrounded her: soaring hawks, wildflowers dotting meadows, distant mountain peaks still capped with snow, but she had little attention to spare for sightseeing. By midday, she had covered a significant distance without incident. She stopped briefly to rest Diablo and eat a small portion of the jerky Daniel had packed. The sun beat down from a clear sky, warming the spring air pleasantly. As she remounted to continue her journey, a movement in the trees ahead caught her attention. Clara froze, her hand instinctively moving to the pocket containing Daniel's revolver. A rider emerged from the pines, then another. Clara's heart sank as she recognized Reed, the man who had threatened them at the cabin. She was outnumbered and outgunned. "Well, well," Reed called, urging his horse forward. "What have we here? Ashton's woman out for a pleasure ride." Clara straightened in the saddle, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm on my way to Virginia City. I have no quarrel with you, sir." Reed laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the small clearing. "Hear that, Jake? She has no quarrel with us." He turned his cold gaze back to Clara. "But we surely have one with your man Ashton. And what better way to hurt him than through his woman?" Clara's mind raced. They clearly assumed she and Daniel were together. Perhaps she could use that misconception to her advantage. "Mr. Ashton anticipated you might try to intercept me," she said, injecting confidence into her voice. "The marshal and his deputies are waiting just beyond that ridge. I'm to signal them if I encounter trouble." Reed's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Clara challenged. "Are you willing to risk it? The marshal has warrants out for all of you after what happened at the Thompson Ranch last month." This was a complete fabrication, but Clara had learned from Daniel that the Blackwater Gang had been terrorizing ranchers throughout the region. It seemed a reasonable guess that they had hit a place called Thompson's at some point. Uncertainty flickered across Reed's weathered face. His companion shifted nervously in his saddle. "Reed, maybe we should," the man began. "Shut up, Jake," Reed snapped. He studied Clara for a long moment, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. Clara held her breath, praying her bluff would work. Finally, Reed spat on the ground. "This isn't over. Tell Ashton we'll be seeing him real soon." With that, he yanked his horse around and rode back into the trees, his companion close behind. Clara remained still until they were out of sight, then sagged in the saddle, trembling with relief and delayed fear. She had escaped this time, but Reed's threat lingered in her mind. Daniel was still in danger, and now they knew she was heading to Virginia City. She would have to hurry. Clara urged Diablo to a faster pace, pushing the horse and herself to their limits. The miles fell away beneath Diablo's hooves, as Clara focused single-mindedly on reaching Virginia City before nightfall. The sun was setting when she finally crested a hill and saw the town spread below her, a bustling settlement of several thousand souls, with proper streets and substantial buildings. After weeks in the wilderness, it seemed impossibly civilized. Clara rode directly to the marshal's office, drawing curious glances from townspeople unused to seeing a lone woman arrive in such obvious haste. She dismounted stiffly, her body protesting the long hours in the saddle. Marshal Thomas Wilson was a stocky man with a graying beard and shrewd eyes. He listened carefully as Clara explained about Daniel, the Blackwater Gang, and her encounter on the trail. "Ashton, you say?" The marshal stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but honest. Never causes trouble." "He needs help, Marshal," Clara pressed. The gang will be back, and next time they might not be scared off so easily. Wilson nodded grimly. Been trying to catch up to the Blackwater boys for months now, slippery as eels they are. He stood, reaching for his hat. I'll round up a posse. We can ride out at first light. First light may be too late, Clara argued. I told them I was meeting you on the trail. When they realize it was a bluff, they'll be even more determined to exact revenge. The marshal studied her with newfound respect. You've got sand, Miss Garfield, I'll give you that. But night riding in these mountains is asking for trouble. Then I'll go back alone, Clara said firmly. You'll do no such thing. A new voice interjected. Clara turned to find a distinguished-looking man with spectacles standing in the doorway. The doctor, she realized, noting his black bag. Dr. Porter, the marshal acknowledged. Miss Garfield here was just telling me about a wounded rancher and the Blackwater Gang. Dr. Porter entered fully, setting his bag on the marshal's desk. I couldn't help overhearing. A gunshot wound, you say? How long ago? 8 days, Clara replied. The bullet went clean through, below the ribs on the right side. I've been tending it as best I could, but I'm no medical professional, the doctor nodded. If infection hasn't set in by now, that's a good sign. Still, he'll need proper care. He turned to the marshal. I agree with the lady, Thomas. If the Blackwater Gang is involved, waiting until morning could be fatal for this man. The marshal sighed heavily. Fine. I'll gather what men I can find quickly. Doctor, can you be ready to ride in 30 minutes? I can, Porter confirmed. Miss Garfield, you should rest here. You look exhausted. Clara shook her head determinedly. I'm going back with you. Mr. Ashton is expecting me. Something in her tone must have conveyed her resolve, because neither man argued further. Within the hour, Clara found herself riding back the way she had come, accompanied by the marshal, the doctor, and 4 deputies. Diablo, despite the long day's exertion, seemed to understand the urgency, responding eagerly to Clara's gentle urging. The moon rose full and bright, illuminating their path through the wilderness. Clara led the way, her knowledge of Daniel's map proving invaluable as they followed the most direct route back to the ranch. They rode hard, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. As dawn broke, Clara recognized the valley that meant they were approaching Daniel's property. Her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Had Raid and his men returned? Was Daniel safe? The cabin came into view, looking peaceful in the early morning light. No smoke rose from the chimney, which struck Clara as odd. Daniel should have had a fire going against the morning chill. Something's wrong, she murmured, spurring Diablo forward. The marshal called for her to wait, but Clara paid no heed. She galloped the remaining distance to the cabin, leaping from the saddle before Diablo had fully stopped. Daniel, she called, rushing to the door. It was ajar, another bad sign. Clara pushed it open, her hand going to the revolver in her pocket. The cabin was empty, the bed where Daniel had been recuperating abandoned. Signs of a struggle were evident: an overturned chair, a broken lamp, bloodstains on the floor. No, Clara whispered, despair washing over her. Daniel, the marshal, and his men arrived, quickly assessing the situation. Looks like they took him, Wilson said grimly. Question is, where? Clara's mind raced. If the Blackwater Gang had captured Daniel, they wouldn't have killed him outright, not when they could prolong his suffering as revenge. They must have taken him somewhere. The old mining camp, one of the deputies suggested. It's abandoned, isolated, perfect place for them to hole up. The marshal nodded agreement. Likely. It's about 5 miles north of here. We should wait, Clara interrupted, noticing something on Daniel's bed. A piece of paper pinned down by a knife thrust through the mattress. She pulled it free, her hands shaking. Ashton for our men, she read aloud. Midnight at Hanging Tree Ridge or he dies slow. The marshal took the paper, frowning deeply. "It's a trap. They're calling us out." "But we have to go," Clara insisted. "They'll kill him." "They'll try to kill us all, Miss Garfield," Wilson said bluntly. "That's what they're counting on." Dr. Porter, who had been examining the blood on the floor, looked up. "This blood is fresh but not extensive. Your Mr. Ashton is likely still alive but wounded. Possibly they reopened his original injury in the struggle." Clara paced the small cabin, her mind working furiously. "Hanging Tree Ridge, where is that?" "About 3 miles east," one of the deputies replied. "Old Oak, where they used to hang horse thieves back in the mining days." "Is there cover there? Places where men could hide?" Clara demanded. The marshal raised an eyebrow at her questions but answered nonetheless. "Rocky outcropping to the north. Some scrub and boulders to the south. The tree stands pretty much alone on the ridge itself." Clara nodded, formulating a plan. "Then we can approach from both directions, catch them in their own trap." The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her strategic thinking. "It could work," the marshal admitted. "But you're staying here, Miss Garfield. This is no business for a woman." Clara drew herself up to her full height. "With all due respect, Marshal, I've kept Daniel Ashton alive for over a week. I've faced down Reed and his men alone on the trail, and I know this land now." She gestured to the map on Daniel's table. "I've studied every inch of it. You need me." Wilson studied her for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "You can guide us to positions, but when the shooting starts, I'll stay clear," Clara promised, though privately she had no intention of remaining on the sidelines if Daniel's life was at stake. They spent the day preparing. The marshal sent one deputy back to Virginia City for reinforcements, while the rest scouted the area around Hanging Tree Ridge, identifying the best approach routes and potential ambush points. Clara insisted on cleaning and loading Daniel's rifle, though she prayed she wouldn't have to use it. As she worked, she found herself thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. 2 weeks ago, she had been a prim schoolteacher heading to a respectable position in Virginia City. Now she was planning an armed confrontation with notorious outlaws to save a cowboy she had known for barely a week. A cowboy who had somehow become desperately important to her. As twilight approached, Clara changed into Daniel's spare clothes trousers and a shirt that hung loose on her smaller frame, but would allow her to move more freely than her skirts. She twisted her hair up and tucked it under a hat, knowing that in the darkness she might pass for a young man at a distance. The marshal raised an eyebrow at her appearance but made no comment. His respect for her had grown throughout the day as she demonstrated her knowledge of the area and her unwavering determination to rescue Daniel. They set out as darkness fell, moving quietly through the wilderness. Clara rode Diablo, the horse now recovered from yesterday's exertions. The familiar feel of the powerful animal beneath her gave her courage. They stopped a mile from Hanging Tree Ridge, tethering their horses in a sheltered grove. From here, they would proceed on foot to avoid detection. "Remember the plan," Marshal Wilson whispered as they gathered for final instructions. "Porter, you stay with the horses. The rest of us will split into 2 groups and approach from opposite sides. No shooting until I give the signal unless they fire first." Clara nodded along with the deputies. The plan was straightforward but relied on surprise and coordination. If the Blackwater Gang was as numerous as they feared, they would still be outnumbered. "Miss Garfield," the marshal said quietly as the others began moving into position, "I know you care for Ashton. But don't let emotion cloud your judgment. These men are killers." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I understand the risks, Marshal, but I didn't come all this way to lose him now." Wilson sighed. Just stay behind me and for God's sake don't try to be a hero." Clara followed the marshal and two deputies as they circled wide to approach Hanging Tree Ridge from the north. The night was clear, stars bright overhead, providing just enough light to see without revealing their position. As they neared the ridge, Clara could make out the silhouette of the ancient oak against the night sky. Its massive branches stretched like gnarled fingers, a reminder of the frontier justice that had once been dispensed there. The marshal signaled for them to spread out. Clara positioned herself behind a large boulder, Daniel's rifle cradled in her arms. From this vantage point, she could see the clearing around the tree. And there, tied to the trunk, was Daniel. Even in the dim light, Clara could see he had been beaten. His head hung forward, his shirt torn and stained dark with what she knew must be blood. But he was alive. She could see the rise and fall of his chest. Around the clearing, she counted 4 men, Reid and 3 others, all armed and alert. They were watching the approaches, clearly expecting the law to arrive from the main trail. Clara felt rage building within her at the sight of Daniel's mistreatment. She gripped the rifle tighter, forcing herself to remain patient. The marshal's plan relied on timing and surprise. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited for the second group to get into position on the southern approach. Finally, Clara saw the flash of light, 3 quick blinks from a shuttered lantern, the signal that everyone was ready. The marshal raised his hand, preparing to give the order to move in, when a sudden noise from the clearing drew everyone's attention. Daniel had regained consciousness. He lifted his head, looking around with obvious pain but alert eyes. Reid noticed and strode toward him, gun drawn. "Looks like your woman didn't bring help after all, Ashton," Reid sneered, loud enough for his voice to carry to Clara's position. "Maybe she decided you weren't worth saving." Daniel's response was too low to hear, but whatever he said made Reid laugh harshly. "You got spirit, I'll give you that," the outlaw said, "but it won't save you. When the clock strikes midnight, you're going to hang from this tree like the dog you are." Clara glanced at the marshal, silently pleading. They needed to move now before Reid decided not to wait for midnight. Wilson seemed to read her thoughts. He nodded once, then gave the hand signal to advance. The lawmen moved forward in unison, emerging from the darkness with weapons trained on the outlaws. "Blackwater Gang," the marshal called. "You're surrounded, drop your weapons." Reid whirled, his gun still pointed at Daniel. "Wilson," he snarled, "should have known you'd come sniffing around." The other gang members drew their weapons, creating a tense standoff. Clara remained behind her boulder, rifle aimed at Reid. If he made any move to shoot Daniel, she would not hesitate. "It's over, Reid," the marshal said calmly. "We've got men all around this ridge. There's no way out for you." Reid's laugh held no humor. "Maybe not, but I can still put a bullet in Ashton here before you take me." Clara saw Daniel tense, preparing himself for the shot he believed was coming. In that moment, something snapped inside her. She would not watch him die, not after everything they had survived together. Without conscious thought, Clara stood, exposing herself. "Reid," she called. All eyes turned to her, including Daniel's. His expression shifted from resignation to horror as he recognized her. "Clara, no," he shouted. Reid's surprise gave the marshal the opening he needed. He fired, the shot striking Reid's shoulder. The outlaw staggered but didn't fall, swinging his gun toward Clara instead. Time seemed to slow. Clara raised Daniel's rifle, remembering his instructions from days earlier. "Aim for the center of what you can see. Don't try for fancy shots." She squeezed the trigger just as Reid fired. The rifle's kick slammed into her shoulder, but she kept her feet. Reid's shot went wild, and he crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest where Clara's bullet had found its mark. Gunfire erupted around the clearing as the remaining gang members fought back. Clara dropped behind the boulder again, her heart pounding in her ears. She had shot a man, possibly killed him. The thought should have horrified her, but all she felt was relief that Daniel was still alive. The gunfight was brief but intense. When silence finally fell, two of the gang lay dead, with Reed and another wounded but alive. The marshal and his men had suffered only minor injuries. Clara rushed to Daniel, pulling out her knife to cut the ropes binding him to the tree. "Daniel," she breathed, supporting him as he slumped forward. "I've got you. You're safe now." His blue eyes, glazed with pain, found hers. "You came back," he murmured. "Knew you would." "Of course I came back," Clara replied, tears threatening to spill. "I couldn't leave you, doctor." Porter hurried over, already opening his medical bag. "Let's get him lying down so I can examine those wounds." They eased Daniel to the ground, Clara cradling his head in her lap while the doctor worked. The marshal supervised the restraint of the surviving outlaws, preparing to transport them back to Virginia City to face justice. "How bad is it?" Clara asked anxiously as Porter examined Daniel. The doctor's expression was grim but not despairing. "The original wound has reopened, and he's got some new one's knife cuts mostly and a nasty blow to the head, but nothing immediately life-threatening if we can get him proper care soon." Relief washed over Clara. "He'll live. With proper care and rest, yes," Porter confirmed. "He's strong and he clearly has something worth living for." Daniel's hand found Clara's, squeezing weakly. "Someone," he corrected in a whisper only she could hear. "Someone worth living for." Clara's heart soared despite the dire circumstances. She bent close, her lips near his ear. "Then you'd better stay alive, Daniel Ashton, because I intend to hold you to that." A faint smile touched his pale lips. "Yes, madam." With the careful assistance of the marshal and his deputies, they transported Daniel back to his cabin. "Doctor." Porter insisted on staying to monitor his condition, while the marshal returned to Virginia City with the captured outlaws, promising to send men to retrieve the bodies of those who had fallen. The next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety and exhaustion as Clara assisted the doctor in caring for Daniel. His wounds, though serious, began to heal under Porter's expert care. By the 3rd day, Daniel was strong enough to sit up and take proper nourishment. "The school term started yesterday," he said quietly as Clara brought him a bowl of broth. "In Virginia City." Clara nodded, settling beside the bed. "I know. You should be there," Daniel continued, "teaching those children like you planned." Clara studied his face, noting the way he avoided meeting her eyes. "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Ashton?" That got his attention. His blue gaze snapped to hers, intense despite his weakness. "Never. But I don't want to be the reason you give up your dreams." Clara set the bowl aside, taking his hand in hers. "What if my dreams have changed?" Hope flickered across Daniel's face, quickly tempered by caution. "Clara, I'm just a rancher. I can't offer you the life you deserve, the comforts you're accustomed to." "You think I came west looking for comfort?" Clara laughed softly. "I came looking for purpose, for a place where I could be more than just poor Miss Garfield jilted at the altar." Daniel's expression darkened. "Someone left you at the altar. The man's a fool." "Perhaps," Clara agreed, "but if he hadn't, I would never have come west. Never found you bleeding by that river. Never heard you say I was the reason you wanted to live." Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "I meant it. Even then, barely conscious, I knew there was something special about you, something worth fighting to stay alive for." Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes. "The school in Virginia City will find another teacher, but I've found something here that I never expected to find again after William broke my heart, a chance at love. Real love, based on more than social standing and family expectations." Daniel reached up with his free hand, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "Are you sure, Clara? Ranch life is hard, especially for a woman raised in the East." "I'm sure," Clara said firmly. "These past 2 weeks have shown me I'm stronger than I ever knew. And besides," she smiled, "someone needs to keep you from getting shot again." Daniel laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his wounds. "I won't argue with that." His expression grew serious again. "I love you, Clara Garfield. I think I've loved you since you found me by that river." Clara's heart felt too full for her chest. "And I love you, Daniel Ashton. Against all reason and propriety, I love you." He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised healing, passion, and a future neither of them had imagined when fate brought them together by a riverside in the Montana wilderness. 6 months later, the small church in Virginia City was filled with well-wishers as Daniel Ashton and Clara Garfield exchanged wedding vows. The bride wore a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk, while the groom stood tall and strong in a new suit, all signs of his injuries now healed. Marshall Wilson served as Daniel's best man, a friendship having formed between the two men during the capture and trial of the remaining Blackwater Gang members. Reed had survived to face justice, sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to the ranch that was now their shared home. Clara had transformed the cabin with small touches curtains at the windows, a bookshelf filled with beloved volumes, a vegetable garden flourishing beside the chicken coop. Daniel had expanded the cattle operation, hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd. The prosperity of the ranch allowed him to begin construction on additions to the cabin, including a proper schoolroom, where Clara taught the children of nearby ranchers 3 days each week. As they stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant hues, Daniel wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Happy Mrs. Ashton," he murmured against her ear. Clara leaned back into his embrace, contentment filling her soul. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Daniel turned her in his arms, his blue eyes full of love. "Thank you for finding me that day, for saving my life." Clara smiled up at him. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Clara reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here from Boston society to a Montana ranch, from heartbreak to profound love. The path had been unexpected, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but had led her exactly where she was meant to be. In the arms of a cowboy who had once whispered that she was the reason he wanted to live, Clara had found not just a home, but a purpose, a partner, and a love worth risking everything for. 2 years after their wedding, Clara gave birth to their first child, a daughter with Daniel's blue eyes and Clara's determined spirit. They named her Hope, a testament to what had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge. As their family grew, eventually adding a son they called Thomas after the marshal who had helped save Daniel's life, the Ashton Ranch became known throughout the territory for its hospitality and prosperity. Clara never regretted her decision to abandon her teaching position in Virginia City. Instead, she found fulfillment in educating the children of the surrounding ranches, building a small but thriving school that operated from their expanded home. Daniel's brush with death had given him a new appreciation for life and community. He became a respected voice in territorial affairs, helping to establish more effective law enforcement throughout the region, and mentoring young ranchers just starting out. Together, they built a legacy of love, courage, and determination, a legacy that began when a Boston schoolteacher found a wounded cowboy by a river and gave him a reason to live.